0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
How creepy was that? That was a human mind directly manipulating a machine, a synthetic voice. It's a pretty interesting article, I reckon. And, well, first off, hello everybody. Welcome to Strange Times. Before I go on, just quickly, thanks to those guys who voted too. I think there's about 80 or 90, which is actually more than I was expecting. And the votes turned out to be about 60% wanting a midweek posting of this series, which is that's the way I was leaning anyway, so I'm happy with that result. Either way, but yeah, it works out. And so here we go. Mind-to-machine speech technology. Neuroengineers have created a new system that can translate simple thoughts into recognizable speech using artificial intelligence and a speech synthesizer. A team of New York-based researchers from Columbia University were able to reconstruct words using only brain activity. Dr. Nima Meskerani led the study and says he sees great potential to help restore speech to people recovering from stroke or living with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Further down the line, this type of tech could also open up doors to brain-connected smartphones that could let users text using their minds. Can you imagine that? Bloody hell, that's all we need, isn't it? His work was published in the journal Scientific Reports. That brain texting idea, I don't want to be a stick in the mud, but I think it's a bad idea. It's like everything, I guess. Potentially there could be some awesome applications, but I think tech is it's moving too fast for humanity. I really reckon we need to put the brakes on it. Anyway, I'll continue with this article. And just in summary, Dr. Nima Meskerani, I had that name perfect just before. Dr. Nima Meskerani and his colleague, Dr. Ashish Dinesh Mehta, first go, studied brain activity of epilepsy patients who already... now I've stuffed myself up here. They studied the brain activity of epilepsy patients who already had electrode implants in their brains to monitor seizures. The doctors asked the patients to recite the numbers 0 to 9 as they recorded the brain signals in the speech centers. Then they trained a virtual neural network, which imitates the neuron structure of the human brain. They taught it to recognize patterns in the signals and translate them into robotic-sounding words using a speech synthesizer known as a vocoder. And there's another article related to this where these other guys basically took it a little step further, and so I'll just quickly read through this. A state-of-the-art brain-to-machine interface created by neuroscientists at the UC San Francisco can generate natural-sounding synthetic speech by using brain activity to control a virtual vocal tract, which is an anatomically detailed computer simulation which includes the lips, jaw, tongue, and larynx. And so just to summarize this one, this research focuses on how the brain's speech centers choreograph the movements of the lips, jaw, tongue, and other vocal tract components to produce fluent speech. I've got a video of this too, which I'll play at the end, which shows what they're talking about. Through this research, it was realized that previous attempts to directly decode speech from brain activity might have met with some limited success because these brain regions do not directly represent the acoustic properties of speech sounds, but rather the instructions needed to coordinate the movements of the mouth and throat during speech. Based on the audio recordings of participants' voices, the anatomical movements of the vocal tract were mapped. This allowed scientists to create a realistic virtual vocal tract for each participant that could be controlled by their brain activity. And here's the video.
The proof that you are seeking is not available in books.
The proof that you are seeking is not available in books.
Shipbuilding is a most fascinating process.
Shipbuilding is a most fascinating process.
Let's have a look at some of the nutty stuff. An elf caught on camera. I will preface this by stating facts I currently know. These photos were taken in quick succession on the night of the abnormally large full moon. By quick succession, I mean approximately 2 seconds. Being a skeptic, I would have at any other time assumed it to be a Photoshop job. But these particular family members are of an older generation that haven't even heard of the program. Some things I've already noticed about the photo include, whatever it is, it wasn't seen by the naked eye, despite being roughly 10 feet in front of them and producing a shadow. The fact that it produces a shadow, for me, rules out the possibility of it being something like a smudge on the lens. It's also opaque, except for what I'd assume is its face. What do you reckon about those photos? At first, it's like, good on you. But I had a closer look and it is an interesting photo. It's an oldie, so you've probably seen it around before. I hadn't personally, so, a few of you probably haven't seen it. It was posted up on Reddit about 2 years ago. But yeah, there it is. Have a look. Here's a weird story. Men in Black. They're always weird stories, those Men in Black ones. And this one's in South Africa. I was 9 years old. I'm an only child who was living with my single mum. Johannesburg in South Africa is a particularly dangerous city, especially for 2 females living on their own. So my mum and I moved into a secure gated estate with electric fences and 24-hour roaming security. Jeez, it's so easy to forget how good I've got it here in Australia. Our house was on a rather quiet street. My mum and I would wake up early on some days before going to work and school. I remember this particular day to be a Friday morning. It was about 5:30 or 6 a.m, and we were in the kitchen making tea and lunches for the day. Our kitchen window faces onto the street, directly perpendicularly, so we were able to see it in its entirety. The street, I think she's talking about. When we opened the kitchen door to let in some fresh air, the sight was unexpected, especially for our type of neighborhood. Several Asian men dressed in black suits, coming out of a car parked at the end of the street, were walking towards our house. As soon as they reached near our kitchen door, they would turn around and pace back to their car, and then back to our door again. This distance was about 60 meters. The men were silent and continued pacing back and forth down the street with blank expressions, not looking at anything in particular. Their behavior was disturbingly repetitive. My mum yelled at them, asking what they were doing, but they were completely unresponsive. After a while, we had to finish up our duties and get ready for the day. We closed the kitchen door. Maybe an hour later, we looked outside again, and they were nowhere to be seen. Nothing similar has ever happened near our house since. There you go, another weird MIB experience. And I might be wrong, but I imagine an Asian man is a kind of a rare sight in South Africa. But yeah, for me, that was a kind of an interesting case. Okay, so this next one is a haunting one. If you're like me, it's kind of like you're a little bit jaded to haunted house stories. But hauntings are so universally common throughout the entire world and throughout history there has to be something to it, because it's the same sort of stories from, Southeast Asia to England, India, everywhere. And here's another one. Haunted house in Hull, England. Bloody motorcycles. Piss off. Haunted house in Hull, England. Sorry, there's a motorcycle going past. I don't know if you guys heard that. People have a hard time staying at one of the most haunted houses in Hull, England. In fact, nobody has lived in the house located at 39 De Grey Street since 2007, with children suddenly appearing from inside the walls and women getting strangled with their own scarves. Other unexplained events that have happened at the house include chairs moving on their own, objects flying across the room, candles suddenly getting blown out. Several mediums have visited the location and claim that there are between 15 and 20 spirits of children who were there when it was used as a foster home. What's even more disturbing is that the location is also home to several ghosts of the adults who supposedly killed the children. Andy Yates has owned the home for over 20 years, but says he's too scared to live there. So instead he allows paranormal investigators to visit the location in order to help him pay his mortgage. Yates lived in the house for 8 years, but had to move out because of the paranormal experiences he was having. Quote, "I've gone from being the biggest ghost skeptic to being one of the biggest believers," he admitted. He even tried renting it out to several families, but they couldn't handle living in there either. Quote, "More than 4 families tried to move in, but none could stay more than a night because their kids were up screaming all night. And some people couldn't return after measuring the house up for furniture," he said. While Yates was living in the house, he experienced countless unexplained occurrences, such as the television remote moving from his chair to the opposite corner of the room, pictures that were pushed out of place, and knives being moved in the kitchen. Even his cat would get scared and appeared to be looking at something that Yates couldn't see. The thing that scared him most was when he saw the ghost of a 7-year-old girl standing at the foot of his bed in the middle of the night. Quote, "I was asleep in bed, but woke up at about 3 a.m. to see something at the bottom of my bed. I thought that it must be a burglar and that he had got into my house, but when I looked closer, I saw that it was a girl standing there that looked hazy and was around 7 years old." End quote. But when his partner got pregnant and the paranormal activity continued, that's when he decided that it was time to move out, and he has not lived there since. And now we go to Australia, and we're going to talk about Yowies, which are Bigfoots, big feet. You know what I mean? This is the name of a town in Australia, Wollongong. Wollongong is renowned for its picturesque mountain surroundings, a strong Aboriginal community, rural charm, and mysterious mythical creatures. But it's most famous for its wooden bongs. That was a joke. Ha ha! But what a weird name, Wooden Bong. I shall continue. Cryptozoologist Tony Healy has interviewed dozens of Aboriginal elders across Australia and said Indigenous people had warned early European settlers about the elusive creatures. Quote, "There were many testimonies given to explorers, missionaries and settlers in the 1820s and 1830s by Aboriginal tribespeople who had seen hairy men, which they knew by many different names," he said. A well-known sighting in the vicinity of Wollongong occurred in 1928 at Palin Creek, about 30 kilometres across the Queensland border in the Border Ranges region. In 1928, at Palin Creek, a Bob Mitchell said he and a mate were riding through that area at about 10 a.m. when they saw a Yowie. Quote, "We saw a Yowie standing in a clearing not far from us. In that light, there was no mistaking it. It was about 7 feet tall, with a black human face and a gorilla-like body covered in thick brownish hair. It showed no aggression, just looked at us for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the bush. It had really big feet and it could move fast." End quote. 2 sightings in the 1970s, widely reported by the media, cemented Woodinbong's reputation as Yowie country. Woodinbong resident Thelma Crew said she saw 2 of the creatures in her Richmond Street yard in late 1976. Her story was reported in the local Northern Star newspaper. Quote, "I didn't turn on the kitchen light straight away because it was such a moonlit night. I stood at the open window looking at the view. This creature then walked onto our lawn from the next door vacant lot and stood there for 2 or 3 minutes looking towards me. He was sort of flexing his arms in a circular movement in front of his face. The creature then moved from the side towards the bedroom where my husband was sleeping. There was another creature of exactly the same height and appearance standing under our bedroom window. They were about 5 feet tall and covered in tan-coloured hair. Their heads seemed to be sunk low into their shoulders. I couldn't see the facial features properly. They had a shuffling kind of walk. I was much too close to mistake it." End quote. Another alleged sighting occurred 10 months later, just 300 metres away, at the home of Jean Maloney. Mrs. Crew had not told anyone about her encounter until after she had read Mrs. Maloney's story in the Northern Star in 1977. Mrs. Maloney told the newspaper that her Australian Terrier had been attacked by a Yowie. She said she was woken by her dog barking and ran into her backyard. Quote, "I suddenly saw the creature directly in front of me. I was within 6 feet of the jolly thing, and I think I stopped breathing for a moment because of the fright. It was sitting on its haunches and had the dog completely crushed against its chest. It was as if it was trying to crush the life out of the little dog. The creature then stood up, looked straight at me, and dropped the dog, which I thought was dead." End quote. Mrs. Maloney described the Yowie as more than 6 feet tall, with an almost hairless face, ape-like, with a heavy brow, no chin or neck, and ginger-coloured hair hanging from its arms and legs. She also said the Yowie was male, and that its genitals were quite apparent. That sounds a little nutty. It allegedly ran away, leaving the dog with wounds to its chest and neck. The dog died a short time later. Mr. Healy said a photo was taken of the injured dog, but the perpetrator of the attack was never found. Quote, "Something killed it, and it would be a very strange thing for Mrs. Maloney to make this up," he said. The only other possible physical evidence to support Mrs. Maloney's sighting was a 22-centimetre long footprint with 5 toes. That's about 7 inches, I do believe. This footprint was photographed by a Northern Star reporter, and also a hair sample was sent to the University of Queensland for analysis. Results of the tests were inconclusive. Quote, "The footprints were no bigger than a human track, so that doesn't count for much. Like everywhere else, there's a distinct lack of tangible evidence," Mr. Healy said. And that's true with so much paranormal phenomena. There's just not that physical evidence that the everyday person needs to take it seriously. And that's all I've got for you today. I hope you all have a excellent day, great week, and I'll see you guys next week.